before the break, our last class, we kind of took a lot of breaks to get ourselves back in. Today we're going to be moving at a decent pace, but not breakneck speed. I'm hoping to be able to finish up chapter 4 today. Guys, you may have noticed before we left for break that you have an assignment that's due this week. Well, I have some good news for you to start off your week because I am so upside down in grading for some of my master's classes that are closing out. I moved this assignment back from the 11th to the 13th. So your assignment that's due this week is going to be due till Friday. So you have a couple extra days to get back in the loop. To go over this assignment real quickly, guys, what I'm asking you to do, based on our discussions in this chapter about whether you would build yourself or you would outsource, I'm asking you to make some business decisions. So we're talking about a website. This website is for a company in Altoona called Heroes for Hire. This is a company that rents out actors and superhero costumes for parties and events. So your criteria, your company, has a skilled HR department. You have people working for you who know how to do staffing, who know how to hire people. And you've got a decent in-house IT department, and you've got people who know their content. You've got people who know how to rent out characters for children's parties. You've got people who know how to market. That being said, you don't have a quality website, so you have to build a website. Now, you have IT staff who are basic programmers and have some basic graphic development capabilities. We're not talking about people maybe who are winning awards, but you can do these things. I'm asking you in 2 to 3 pages to tell me what steps you would take in developing an e-commerce site. Now let's think about this for a second. If you're talking about time-challenged parents who are booking superheroes for their kids' birthday parties, what are some of your concerns going to be? What are some things you're going to need to take into consideration? With time-challenged parents who are trying to book their kids' birthday parties, what are some things you might want to think about? How are these folks likely going to be finding and using your service? That's the question. Are they going to be sitting at home on midnight on Tuesday night, or are they going to be watching a soccer game and looking at their iPhone? That's a question, too. Hey, what do you guys think? It could be, so you're going to have a mobile presence. You're also going to have a decent online presence and a traditional website, which means you probably want to make it scale. Is it going to make a lot of sense for you as a small company to get into developing your own mobile app? Probably not. And are people likely going to use this service more than once a year or in their lifetime for that matter? Probably once to several times. So the idea of doing an independent app development makes no sense. So I'm asking you, would you insource or outsource development of the site? Would you pay somebody else to develop your site, or would you develop it yourselves? Would you host it on your existing company network, or would you farm it out to somebody else? What would be your key considerations? What are things that you would want in terms of functionality for your site? What kind of tools would you want to use for your site? Things like social networking, things like diagnostics, things like analytics. What would be useful for you? We're going to keep in mind we're also going to be doing a live demonstration of some analytics coming up in the next week or so. I want you to think about your own skill set too. For example, if you're somebody who's very good at developing websites, you'd have every reason possibly to try this yourself. What would be the biggest advantages of building this website yourself? Yes? Exactly right. You can make it any way you want, and you can put sweat equity into it. Is there a disadvantage to building the site yourself? Yes. If you don't have the expertise, you're going to have to learn it, or you're going to have to buy it, for example. Now, if you've got an existing hosting at your site, what will be the advantage of hosting this website on your existing web connection and web servers? What would be the advantage of that? Yes? Here it is. So from this side of the room, what's the disadvantage of hosting it yourself? Yes? You got it. And most small companies probably have one internet connection in their office. We're not talking redundancy or redundant hosting. That's the kind of stuff I want to see on this, guys. 2 to 3 pages. Feel free to use bullet points. Feel free to use charts. Feel free to use tables. Give me an explanation how you would build this site and why. What decisions you would make. Justify your choices. If you flat out told me I'm going to outsource the whole thing, because this does not fit with our core responsibilities, and we want our IT guys to be focusing on making sure our billing systems are working, that's legitimate. Just tell me what you think and why. Do you guys have any questions on the assignment? It's due by Friday, and that's moved back. It still says Wednesday on Canvas. I'll fix that today. I just made the decision to move that back a couple of days for you. We're going to start off, however, with some discussions about what's in the news. What's everybody been talking about? Coronavirus. Some of you may be experienced over break with the other kind of corona that comes with a line. This one comes with nausea and possible death if you're over the age of 65. It's not as good of a corona. But we're going to be talking about how this affects the world of e-commerce. We're going to start off with a brief video about how this is already China. Any reactions? Yes?
This is a side note, I'm probably going super related, but I think it's kind of interesting that they're using more technology when there's a kind of a technology shortage going on, like because of all the factories shutting down in China, that it's getting harder for people like smaller technology manufacturers to get the components they need. So I just think it's kind of interesting that they're starting to do more stuff that requires technology and there's like a shortage, so like
So yeah, one's going to perpetuate the other. In fact, greater use of things like automation that are going to make use of those resources are going to perpetuate the growing shortage. Well, very interesting point. Other reactions? What do you think about this response to the fear about this disease? I mean, let's actually talk about this for a second. What are the ways that what are the things that people are most afraid of right now? And obviously, getting the disease. Well, that's causing people to do what? So we're talking about hoarding supplies. What else are people doing? What other behavior is changing because of this looming crisis? Yes? Yeah, people are avoiding crowds, particularly people, I think it was the CDC actually issued a kind of a warning to older people in the country, try to avoid large public gatherings, and above all, stay off of cruise ships. What great advice at this point. But we're talking about the idea of people trying to avoid being in large public spaces where they can get exposed to this virus. I mean, we're seeing drones now being used for food delivery. It's something that was experimental. Now we're seeing this. This could potentially be a perfect storm of things like automation, logistics, and even ghost restaurants or ghost markets. Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah. Especially things that aren't just like physical goods. Like, I know it's not necessarily like good for Spotify, regardless. But people are pulling out their stocks out of them, like seemingly, like almost no reason. It's not like they are affected by it for sure. But a lot of people just pull out just because they just heard about this virus.
Well, in the markets too, guys. Do I have any? I apologize for never remembering this. Do I have any finance majors in here? Like, why is this playing such hell with the markets right now? What's your theory, Emily?
I mean, I just think in general, like, people are like, just like scared. So I think just like the scaredness of people, like, just investing in money and just in general, like, everything's just uncertain.
We want things that we can actually put our money into that are not going to evaporate. Believe me, since this whole crisis has started, I have not looked at my 401k. I don't want to see how bad it's doing in this market. But I think that's part of it is fear. You guys have been following too what's been happening with oil in the global market too, right? What's happened with oil in the last 24 hours? It's bottomed out by 30%. Do you guys know what oil's trading for a barrel right now? We were just talking about this in Biz 101 this morning. It's down from $50 a barrel to $35 a barrel. So we're seeing essentially now we're going to be potentially having sub 2% $2 a gallon gasoline, and it's not necessarily a good thing because there's a glut in the markets, because no production is happening in Asia, because just about everything we buy is made out of plastic, which comes from petroleum. So we're seeing global slowdowns in commodities. We're seeing a market that's going to stagnate, and at the same time, we're going to see increasing automation to try to counter this crisis, and more people are going to be buying basic things online so they don't have to head to the store to deal with it. Is this going to help the problem or make it worse? What are your thoughts? I'm asking a lot of you your first day back. We're doing some heavy thinking here. Well, what do you think, Adam?
I think an event like this might kind of like, I mean, obviously it hurts stuff like jobs, but I think it's kind of pushing us forward with the technology, like you said, that was experimental in the past. It might become more mainstream because people will realize that an event of like a crisis like this, then you don't have to like switch back. So obviously, like, in the short term, right away, it'll impact things like jobs, but I think that eventually that'll just kind of transform how the whole economy is into more technology-based.
So we're going to see a rapid push to the new economy. I like it. Any other reactions to this, guys? My last question for you before we jump into this material that we have to cover today, guys. My last question for you is, what is driving the panic here? Is it just the disease itself, or is there something else? What's so different about this than the last time we had a big illness? I would argue, too, my opinion, feel free to agree or disagree, I think social media is playing one hell of a role in this, too, in terms of people self-reporting this kind of stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's kind of like the media, the way they've been covering it, because in a lot of cases you could argue that the flu is worse every year, like just the regular flu that anyone can get pretty easily. And in a lot of figures that seems to be like pretty deadly compared to this, but it's just, I guess, this new kind of thing, and so everyone's just freaking out because they don't really know like what happened, like, that kind of thing. It's just
Sure.
kind of like an unknown, and so I think that's partially fueled by the way the media covers it, because if people kind of just saw the facts, or if it was compared to something else, and people had kind of a way to gauge it, then, and I'm not saying it is bad, but I think people think like it's worse than it's there.
As the old expression goes, bad news travels fast. I play on the old expression, I should say, and people are more likely to latch on to something negative than positive. Here's one thing I will lay out for you as an apolitical statement that gets into politics just a little bit. If we had to look at the two opposing forces that are running for political power this year, we've got the Republican Party and Donald Trump, and then we've got the Democratic Party and potentially either Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden, most likely. Guys, what are the major platforms that they're running? Ryan, what's Trump's big pitch for re-election?
The economy's doing well. Look at what I did the last 4 years. It's going to happen again. So consistency.
We got Trump pitching the economy. What are the Democrats pitching? What's their big issue that they're selling? Universal health care. So if we have a scenario where the markets are not recovering, we're suffering from a pandemic, and people are voting based on emotion, my tenet for you is this could sway the outcome of an election if the markets don't recover from this. We'll see when we get to November. Yes?
I saw like an interesting article that basically some sort of like big kind of like pandemic comes out every single election year.
Interesting. Wow, it all depends on how you play it. If you're pitching healthcare, it's a pretty good thing to have happen. If you're pitching market stability, not so much. Pretty interesting. I'll be interested to see how it plays out. Well, guys, we're going to jump in unless you have any last words, guys. Going once, going twice. Remember to use your hand sanitizer and wash your hands, and no more handshakes. Give elbow bumps. Guys, when we were talking about what went into a successful e-commerce site, I don't need to read all of these to you. I'm going to ask you in your own words, what makes an e-commerce site successful? What makes you want to buy stuff online on a particular website? When you think about the places you buy stuff, where do you buy and why? Yes, sir.
Probably like the price, and like for me, it's the price and the reviews.
So
if something's cheap and has bad reviews, I'm not going to buy it. But if something's cheap and has good reviews, I'll be more likely to buy it.
So the actual product,
Even if something's more expensive and has better reviews.
the actual product review and price competitiveness. What else drives us to buy stuff on a website? Yes.
Ease of use. So like with Amazon, I don't have to constantly re-enter all of my data or anything like that. I can just purchase stuff.
They make it very easy. It's all there all the time. What else makes it easy to buy stuff online? Yes. So lots of information. We can make an informed choice. What about other things? What else makes you want to buy something or more apt to buy something on a website? How many of you have bought something on your cell phone in the last month? Todd, what did you use and why?
I bought something. I don't know if it was in the last month, but I bought. If I'm bored, like I'll go on Amazon.
Yeah.
Yeah, time to pop.
Ease of use, though. Am I right? Yeah. So here's what we're talking about, guys. We're talking about functionality, whether or not it works for you. Information. Are you able to get that deep information on product reviews or actual manufacturer information about what you're buying? Is it easy to use? And when we say also redundant navigation, that means can you use a search bar to find what you're looking for? And at the same time, again, using the Amazon example, what I have in my cart on my desktop shows up in my cart on my app. Then we've got multi-browser functionality. What that means is whether I'm using Safari or whether I'm using a mobile version of Chrome, does your website work? Simple graphics. Amazon, for example, or Walmart are not exciting, sexy pages to look at, but they load quickly and they're easy to read. The text is easy to read. In terms of things that also help us with content, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because this is not a pure computer science class. But the bottom line, if you're using things like Active Server pages or Java, you have pages that can create and be dynamic and come up on their own. If you're using things like widgets, for example, that's kind of an outdated term at this point, but we used to have widgets that we could use to give us shortcuts on our desktop in the same way that we have apps on our phones. Are these pages interactive in giving us custom content that makes us want to buy things? We start talking about personalization. That means every time I go back, I'm getting treated personally based on what my buying habits have been. Is it customizable? Can I decide how I want to get updates? Can I decide if I get email updates when you get new supplies and things because I'm a Gen Xer and I love email? Or should I just get a text update when the product I'm looking for is coming back in? So we have personalization and customization. And finally, delicious, delicious cookies mean we don't always have to log back on to Amazon because we've got a file on our computer that is tracking us on our phone that tell the manufacturers, tell these companies when we come back to see them. These are a big deal these days too now, though, guys. Privacy and accessibility. When we're talking privacy, what I mean by that is, do I have some belief that my information is being protected? Privacy and confidentiality. Companies like Facebook have run afoul of consumers in this regard because they've been making use of our information without our consent. At least we don't believe it's with our consent because we clicked on the terms and conditions and didn't read any of them. When was the last time anybody ever read that? Guys, when you get an update to your iPhone, don't you love that button you can click that says, I'll take you to the bottom so you don't have to read the whole thing? That's exactly what privacy policy should not be about. You should be able to find out how your information is being used. How many of you are Spotify users, for example? And do you know, for example, how many of you are controlling how Spotify uses your personal information? Yeah, none of us do. And that's why you're getting such great recommendations on your music choices. Seriously. Although I do have to question, sometimes I don't feel like they know my music tastes at all when I see some of the recommendations. I am not a bro country listener, and I don't understand what they're trying to turn me into. I don't get it. And then we get into what we refer to as accessibility. Guys, accessibility means if you're using a screen reader to access a computer, will your e-commerce site work well with a screen reader? Has anybody here ever worked with somebody who has visual impairment? Have you ever watched somebody who cannot see use a computer? It is a miracle to behold. You've seen it? What's it like, Ty?
You know, Dave Heisel?
I don't.
He's a student. He's legally blind, so whenever he doesn't have his contacts or glasses,
Wow. Does he use a screen reader?
I don't think so.
If you watch a blind person using a computer, I knew a gentleman who was a computer programmer who was blind. I don't mean legally blind. I mean literally had no vision at all and wrote code. And the way he was able to do this is his screen reader would tell him what was in front of him when he would move his mouse. Somebody who is using a screen reader can contemplate and understand spoken English about twice the rate we can because his other senses would compensate for it. So if you read, a person who is reading this with a screen reader, a blind person, would sound something like this. Set of public statements declaring how site will treat customers' personal information that is gathered by site. That's literally how fast it is. And they can accommodate that stuff because their other senses have come across. Let me ask you guys, when we think about people who have visual impairments, what is the biggest challenge for us as potential e-commerce entrepreneurs to reach those audiences? What are the big challenges? Blind consumers. What is our challenge? Yes. and we have screen readers for that, but I'm thinking of something else. How are you guys consuming information most of the time when you're not on your computer? How the hell does a blind person use a touchscreen phone? Think about that. They've been working on technology for years to be able to make Braille pop up on screens literally in real time, but it hasn't happened yet. We have had, the federal government has repeatedly tried to make us, make our websites more accessible. For example, if you want to know why so many federal government websites look so bland and boring, it's not just because they're from the government, it's because they are legally mandated to work with screen readers. You can't have fancy code, you can't have a lot of graphics. These are meant to be used by screen readers. And we're getting more and more people who have various kinds of disabilities these days. One of the companies I like to point out is a company called Era, who is really getting into the game in terms of helping blind consumers make use of technology, in this case, actually in-store. I feel the need to show this to you because there are ways around these problems.
At least my mom, every time she buys milk or stuff like that, she will always look at the expiration date and she'll be really picky about it. So I feel like that'll be really difficult for them to like actually, I don't know, like find the right one or the one they actually want. Or let's say with the bananas, like I don't like green bananas. I don't like kind of black bananas. So
Sure.
we could help really find the one that you actually want or you actually would like. But I think that it's a great idea and it's really helpful for them. At least it's a great experience to be able to do something like that because they may not be able to do it.
It's not without its challenges, for sure, yes.
Your like the ads are always like way above what the actual quality of the video would be. I don't think that they'd actually be able to see a lot of the stuff that's in front of them. They had to like wait for the video to focus in and clear up like that.
You have certainly presented an ideal. We're going to ping pong back here in the back of that, yes.
Yeah, very even part of the commercial made a sense where she was like, "Oh, the banana's in the corner of the." It just know if it's at the corner or not. Like, it didn't even make sense in the video. I don't know. There's no chance that's ever gonna work. They're gonna be pointing the video at people's feet and stuff. But can you point the camera up? Can you?
You just have to tell them where you want them to point.
That's we're going to ping back over here in the back.
Do you think it really makes business sense as well? Like, so would that be like her only job, directing blind people like to the store?
See, to me, that's, as they say in business, to me, that's the long pole in the tent. You know, do you have a substantial consumer base? And when I say this, I mean no disrespect to anybody who struggles with visual disabilities, but do you have a substantial enough user base to justify this kind of business?
Is there no blind people shopping there? Like, that would keep like, people doing that job.
I mean, for example, if you there's a place I think it's called the Milton Hershey School for the Blind, and it would make sense, for example, in maybe that area to have a service like this because you got a substantial consumer base. But nationally, I don't know. Yes.
I was thinking that, like, I feel like this has a lot of complications, and I think something that would solve that is just personal shopper market. Like, how they pick out stuff for you, pick it up. Well, you can just have them, like, if the website is exclusionary or something like that, you don't have to go through the trouble of, like, going through the store. I feel like that's a lot more complicated for someone else to try to describe things and that kind of thing. If they can go on like the website, pick everything out that they want, and then just have someone pick it up or pick it up or whatever. I think that's a lot. There's a lot less complications with that.
There's no doubt about that. Yes.
Like if this blind person falls or bumps into anyone, like they're gonna say, "Oh, that air led me right into that person, and the whole aisle fell."
Well,
I
no.
just imagine, like, I started laughing. I couldn't help it because I just imagine being one of these people talking to the blind person, like, "Look out! Look out!"
Man, we are the mean spirits flying high here today. Wow. But you know, you raise a valid point though. Let's be honest about something. If we have a blind consumer who's coming into the store and without the help of this, and they hit into something and hurt themselves, is there the likelihood they're still getting sued too? Yeah, I mean that absolutely can still happen. and probably would be less expensive. Guys, I bring this up for a couple of reasons. Number one, I want to be clear. Like, I think inclusivity is a good thing. I think the way, for example, the point that it would be easier to have groceries delivered, I get that. I also get that somebody who's a blind consumer probably wants to do what everybody else does, you know. So we want to be inclusive that way too. But then there is whether or not it makes business sense. And for example, if we've got a large blind population in a given area, actually hiring somebody, or for that matter, maybe even a volunteer, might make more business sense. It does come down to things like personal preference too. Yes. Fair enough. And I don't advocate this to be a perfect solution for anything. I think it's interesting that companies are looking in this direction. I think it's worth exploring in terms of how accessible should our websites be. When you think about it, guys, how many of you have ever seen a YouTube video or watched a YouTube video where captions were on, with auto caption, and it was absolutely hysterically bad? Yeah, so in terms of these tools that we're trying to make accessibility, every time we make something more accessible to populations with special needs, we're taking away the features at times for people who do not have special needs. And so the question is, where's the balance in that? For example, if you want to know why this series of tables is taller than the rest in this room, do you know why? The wheelchairs have been on. I think it's a reasonable expectation that somebody in a wheelchair should be able to have access to an accessible bathroom, should have some place to sit. We shouldn't be making them feel less than simply because we're fortunate to have use of our legs and they do not. So where is the line when it comes to accessibility? I'm not going to tell you I have the answer. I'm going to tell you that it's worth considering when we're getting into this kind of design, to realize there are people who don't have the gifts we've been given, and to think about how we can include them in the process as well. I don't mean to say ERA is perfect by any means, but I think it's interesting to think about. Any other thoughts before we move on, guys? Thoughts or considerations? Full disclosure, I'm a little passionate about this stuff. Years ago, I used to work with sign language interpreters. Anybody here speak ASL? I've taken an ASL class. When you get into the deaf culture, for example, it's a very interesting culture that sometimes runs parallel lines next to our own in terms of not being included and actually at times not wanting to be included. So it's an interesting kind of thing. And I really like to see how we can be more inclusive in there. So guys, to move on, we're going to be spending some substantial time talking about mobile apps and mobile app development in the coming chapters, but to really draw some distinctions here, one of the biggest things that's really been the big debate these days is where does the future lie? We've got two major operating systems for cell phones, and by those two systems I'm talking about Android and iOS. We've got two major operating systems. If you go anywhere outside the United States, what's generally the dominant operating system? It's Android. For whatever reason, in the United States, we tend to prefer Apple. Which means, for example, if you're developing a website for a mobile presence, are you developing a mobile responsive site, or are you concentrating more on your app? If you're Amazon, you're doing all of the above. You're developing a mobile app for every major platform, and you're also making a website that is responsive and works well on mobile browsers, that rescales. If we go to the most common resolutions for people accessing websites, as of 2019, more people are accessing the web on mobile browsers than they are on desktop browsers. So there is an argument to be made for what we refer to as mobile-first design. And then we also get into the idea of whether or not we're going to make a native app or a hybrid app. A native app simply is an app that's designed to make use of particular aspects of a particular operating system. An example would be Safari for the iPhone is a native app. It's made to run on Apple. A hybrid app, for example, might be something that actually works on multiple operating systems by making use of some components. An example would be, because I'm a car nut, I have Motor Trends app on my iPhone. It's making use of web clipping services from within Safari. Even though it is its own mobile app, it's considered a hybrid app because it's using elements of the operating system on that phone. And we have some apps that will work on all operating systems, but we find that that's starting to become less common because we're writing specific apps for specific operating systems. So you can start looking right off the get-go when you're building your presence. Are you going to be doing mobile as your primary presence? If you're Uber, your primary website, your primary usage is going to be on mobile devices. People aren't carrying laptops around asking for cabs. So you're going to focus on mobile. There are some companies that still may focus more on desktop. If you're doing business to business, for example, if you're Granger and you're selling large amounts of tools, services, and supplies, people are not going to be doing as much of that commerce on a small screen. They're still going to be using large screens for large orders. So again, do you want to think about a mobile website or app development? That depends on what your focus is and depends on your budget as well. If you're using a native app, that means you're making extensive use of things that are built into an operating system. So for example, we can use Google Maps on Android or iOS. It has a few more features on Android than it has on iOS because it's making extensive use of the Android operating system. So, guys, does it make sense so far? That was a very quick explanation of the differences between the two. When we're looking at a mobile presence, the things we have to look at are not that much different than what we would look at for any traditional website. We have to know, for example, in terms of hardware, we're talking about small devices, large amounts of graphics, and large amounts of animation. In addition to using up our small screen real estate, also make use of battery and processor time as well. So we need to think about what's going to work on a small screen. In terms of connectivity, although mobile is catching up with things like 5G, Wi-Fi is still quicker than most mobile connections. So you want to have bandwidth-sensitive applications, things that are going to be able to scale to work on a little bit of bandwidth. We're smaller screens. And also in terms of navigation, who here likes to do video editing, or let me rephrase it, how likes to do photo editing of any kind? Which is easier, mobile device or your laptop? Yeah, because you've got greater real estate, you've got greater detail. If you're doing things like basic photo editing, for example, the interface affects how elaborate those can be on a mobile device. Those are constraints you need to think about as well. And again, in terms of other things to think about, responsive versus adaptive web design, just all we're talking about here basically meaning responsive web design would make a completely different version of the website based on your resolution, and adaptive web design maybe takes a couple key elements and puts onto a mobile screen to make it equivalent to a full desktop type application. Guys, in terms of where we're doing mobile development these days, a lot is happening in C and Java still, obviously, but there are lots of open source ways we can do this, and even developer kits or toolkits we can buy to develop mobile applications. With a little bit of luck, we may be fooling around with developing some mobile before the end of the semester, actually giving you some chances to play with some real estate. And again, a lot of this is a little redundant. Guys, what it really comes down to, if you're interested in this stuff, there's a lot of work to be had in mobile development these days, particularly in the world of developing mobile apps and getting ready for mobile e-commerce. With that being said, guys, we covered the material we needed to cover for today. And so, if somebody will ask me one quality question, I'll let you out into the sunshine 10 minutes early today. Yes? Honestly, it just comes down to its convenience. It's right there. If I'm killing time while my wife is in Target or whatever, there it is. I can read the latest car news and read about Lamborghinis I'll never be able to buy. There's no real advantage to it anymore, though, when you look about how well things scale on the mobile version of Chrome, for example. I think it's going to be something that in the long term, if I'm not getting some actual functionality about it, when I get my next phone, I probably won't bother. You know, it's already there. So, guys, I'm going to let you out on your first day of class 10 minutes early. How about that? Enjoy.